Hi everyone, Jason here from Spiritualbabies.net, and you're joining us again for another Haftarah Half-Hour with our friend Rabbi Joshua Neely.
Good to see you again, Jason.
And this week we're going through the Haftarah for Vayeishev, which is Amos 2:6 through to 3:8. So as usual, can you give us a roundup of what the contents of the Torah portion this week, so we can draw some connections to it as we go through the text?
Certainly, although I think we'll save the drawing the connections until we get to the trigger line, because it's not a very clear connection as you might see in other haftarot. So the Torah portion this week, Vayeishev, is the beginning of the cycle of Joseph's life. So it starts off with who he was and what he was all about, and then of course quickly moves into his difficulties with his brothers and the almost murder converted into a selling into slavery, and then his experiences down in the land of Egypt. There's a brief distraction with the story of Judah and Tamar. Say distraction, it's actually a very, very important chapter, but it does sort of interrupt the flow. Although it's an interesting contrast between the two characters of Judah and Joseph. But more on that some other time when we're talking Torah rather than Haftarah.
Yeah, which we totally have to do that once we've got through all these Haftarah portions. All right, so we're going to start off. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, for 4 I will not revoke it. Kind of stopping in the middle of a phrase there, because I've read that through a few times over the last week to try and find the flow of it, because I'm sure there's a breath in there somewhere. But I don't understand what it's saying. For 3 transgressions of Israel, for 4 I will not revoke it. Can you say that in plain English?
No. This is a phrase that is it's a poetic flourish. It's an idiomatic type expression, and it is open out to a lot of interpretation, even from the original Hebrew. So the proper English reading can't be said to be the proper English reading. It depends on how you want to read this. So one interpretation of this is that if a person commits a transgression the first time, the third time, the first time, the second time, the third time, that God is still holding back in terms of beginning the process of bringing punishment. But on the 4th, then God will not relent. God was not going to revoke the punishment. God will allow the punishment to take its course. Of course, the idea is that God's patience during those first 3 transgressions should be used for us to do tshuva, for us to return and stop what we're doing. But what Amos is saying here is that the crimes of the northern kingdom of Israel have reached such a state that it has passed that limit. It has reached a point now where it is going to happen. Perhaps I should point out that Amos is one of the first of the what we call literary prophets, as opposed to the historical prophets. The historical prophets like Elijah and like Nathan and Samuel, their prophecies and their words are essentially written in a narrative format, whereas in the literary prophets we turn to more poetic style of prophecy. And the first section of Amos is in fact a whole series of other prophecies against other nations, including the southern kingdom of Judah. But now the real focus is going to shift to this northern kingdom of Israel. And during this time period, a little context is probably important. Jeroboam was king up in the north, and it was a time when things were going well for the north materially. They had a number of good military victories. There was generally good prosperity, but societally, the social fabric of the society was becoming extremely corrupt, as we'll see by the focus that Amos is going to have.
Okay, I'll do that again. Thus said the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, for 4 I will not revoke it. Because they have sold for silver those whose cause was just, and the needy for a pair of sandals. Are you who trample the heads of the poor into dust on the ground, and make the humble walk a twisted course? Father and son go to the same girl, and thereby profane my holy name. So it sounds already pretty rough. They've sold for silver those whose cause was just, and needy for a pair of sandals. It sounds all the morals are out the window. The father and son go to the same girl. I'm assuming that's a sexual thing.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, it doesn't sound good. I mean, and that one there, the father and son go to the same girl. I seem to remember there's a Torah command that says that the son cannot marry the father's bride.
We're not talking about bride here. We're talking about prostitution.
I see. I'm just such a good,
Yeah.
wholesome person. It didn't even cross my mind. Wow. Okay.
Um, and the idea of selling the selling for the someone whose cause was just for silver is talking about the bribery that was taking place within the courts. That if a litigant came to you with a just cause, the person who had wronged him would just buy off the judge, and then the case would be settled in the wrong direction, as it were. And
And
the needy for the pair of sandals, in fact, is considered to be our trigger phrase for the Torah connection. It doesn't really shine out very clearly, does it? So you have to follow the interpretation. So the idea is that, of course, the brothers sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, and Joseph then ends up in slavery. And what the sages are doing when they read this, and why they chose this, is they're saying the sale of Joseph was the injustice that is being described here. And the pair of sandals, the price for the pair of sandals, they do an interesting little bit of math. They say, so he was sold for 20 pieces of silver, but there were 10 brothers involved in the sale. Benjamin wasn't involved, according to tradition. Therefore, 20 divided by 10 is 2. 2 pieces of silver each, just enough to buy a pair of shoes. Which, again, is not trying to focus too much on the literalism, but it's trying to say, look at the act of the brothers. When it says they sold him for 20 pieces of silver, that may sound like a fair price, but they're dividing that 10 ways, which means each one of them was guilty of committing this crime for the payoff of all of 2 pieces of silver, all of, a pair of shoes. Would you really sell your brother for a pair of shoes? I mean, yeah, cumulatively they got more, but each one of them was only selling their brother for a pair of shoes. And that's coming back again within this notion of the Haftarah, that the bribery that was taken and the abuse of the poor wasn't done to just get fabulously wealthy, but was done even if all they were getting was a pair of sandals.
it's a valid point and a good message, but a stretch in connection, I think, between this Haftarah and the Torah portion. But I like it. I think it's good. Why not? Why not take the time and find connections like that? Okay. They recline by every altar on garments taken in pledge, and drink in the house of their god wine brought with fines they imposed. So garments taken on pledge. These would be items of clothing like cloaks and things that they've taken in lieu of payment.
Not in lieu of payment, in temporary security, collateral. So
in the Torah we'll find that if a person, all they have is a cloak, you don't take it off them.
You're not supposed to take it, and even if you felt you had to return it to them in the evening in order that they have something to sleep in and not freeze. Most people in the ancient world were rather poor, and many people had only 1 or 2 sets of clothing, and often their outer cloak was also their blanket. They didn't have a separate piece of cloth that they could spare just for the bedtime. They would wear that during the day too when they were cold. And the idea that you would be just reclining at the altar and drinking in the house of God on things that you had taken illegitimately and unjustly is the height of hypocrisy, which is what Amos is trying to say, is that you can't come and worship God while abusing the poor. That doesn't work.
It does seem to have escalated very quickly. It's one thing to treat people badly, but to then go to the place where you're supposed to worship God with those items and get drunk at the same time. It's hard to think of where could it get worse from that point.
There was a couple hundred years after this where it kept getting worse, but
Yet I destroyed the Amorites before them, whose statues were like the cedars, and who was stout as the oak, destroying his boughs above and his trunk below. And I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and led you through the wilderness 40 years, to possess the land of the Amorite. And I raised up prophets from among your sons, and Nazarites from among your young men. Is that not so, O people of Israel? Amorites being the people that inhabited the land before Israel?
well, one of the lands there, and also one of the foes for the Northern Kingdom that they had overcome. So basically, what God is saying is, look, I've done all of this for you. I brought you up. I helped you fight against your enemies. I've given you prophets. I've inspired your people to be dedicated to me enough to take a Nazirite vow. And this is what you're doing. It's not like you haven't been shown the way. It's not as though you haven't been given instruction. It's not as though you have no reason to be grateful to me or to repay me by obeying my laws and treating the poor properly. This is not just wrong, but it is the most rank betrayal.
Is that not so, O people of Israel, says the Lord? But obviously, before we go into that, because it's the very next line, Nazarites take a vow, don't they, of sobriety, if you like. I think even the mother of Samson was told not to drink wine.
Right. The mother of Samson was a very special case, but yes, in general, a Nazirite for the duration of their vows will not touch not only wine, but not anything from the vine at all.
And they grow their hair, is that right?
They grow their hair, or in the case of those whose hair may not grow so quick, we just say they don't cut their hair.
Right. Because I like to think that Samson was a little skinny guy. You always see him in the films as this big muscular Hulk, but he didn't get his strength through his strength. He got his strength through God. So I'd like to think that he was a little skinny guy, and with hair, maybe not super long hair. It does take a long time to grow. But you made the Nazarites drink wine and ordered the prophets not to prophesy. Oh, I will slow your movements as a wagon is slowed when it is full of cut grain. Flight shall fail the swift, the strong shall find no strength, the warrior shall not save his life, the bowman shall not hold his ground, and the fleet-footed shall not escape, nor horseman save his life. Even the most stout-hearted warrior shall run away unarmed that day, declares the Lord. It ramps very quickly from enforcing, because it does look like it's enforcing people to go against what they maybe what they spiritually feel they should be doing, and then it looks like God's coming in and saying that everyone is going to be, it doesn't matter how strong you think you are now, everyone is going to be touched by this, and no one's going to get out.
Well, that's the great fallacy at the heart of the society of the Northern Kingdom of Israel, and really which has been replicated in many times throughout history, which is those who abuse the poor believe that their might, their power will protect them, and therefore being unjust isn't seen as being a flaw. It's just an opportunity, because as long as I'm strong, I'll be able to protect myself from the injustices of others, so I can produce my own justice, my own security. I don't need the justice of the community. I don't need the justice that God has instructed us to engage in, because I can protect myself without justice. And what Amos is saying is that no, eventually all of us will be caught up to by injustice. You may think you can outrun it. You may think you can outfight it, but ultimately it is a steamroller. Corruption and injustice will catch up and crush everyone, which is really the flip side of what verse 12 is, and the earlier parts of this Haftarah, which is trying to point out that the direct corruption of the powerful in the Northern Kingdom causes indirectly the corruption of the poor. There's a very great comment by Rashi, one of the great interpreters from the Middle Ages, where he says that when the powerful were walking through their way and they looked down at the poor, all they thought of was, how can I exploit this person? How can I get from them what little they have to make myself richer, grander, and more powerful? And he says, and that had the effect of making the poor live in fear, because they knew everybody who was walking by was looking for the angle of how to exploit them. And because they were then living in fear of being exploited, they themselves walk a crooked path. So what's being described here is really the sort of domino effect of the moral dissolution of a society. When the judges take bribes, when the powerful realize that they can exploit the judges now and get whatever they want simply through their power, then the poor will do what they feel they must to protect themselves, and you end up with a cascade effect from the top down, where everyone is turned into corrupt people because of the flaws in the basic system of justice and right.
Reading through the last few passages there, I get the impression as well that this is being directed at maybe the cause of some of their kind of instilled safety, because the text clearly is picking out warriors and bowmen and horsemen, so they must have laid a lot of stead in their army, and there must have been a point where they were like, well, you know, we can kind of do what we want because we are really entrenched here, and we can support ourselves, but clearly that's not going to be the case.
Right, and as I said, this comes at a period when the Northern Kingdom was doing quite well for itself. This isn't a time when the powerful of the Northern Kingdom felt vulnerable. This is when they felt invulnerable. And that should make righteousness easier. But unfortunately, as we see in this case, it had the opposite effect.
Chapter 3. Hear this word, O people of Israel, that the Lord has spoken concerning you, concerning the whole family that I brought up from the land of Egypt. I love the use of the word family there. You really don't see that very often when you're getting, because God really does bring up the I brought you out of Egypt. It happens an awful lot, but I've never seen, I don't think, family use that. You alone have I singled out of all the families of the earth. That is why I will call you to account for all your iniquities. And then before we go into the kind of, it's like a Proverbs section. So again, this is a reminder, isn't it, of your roots, where you came from?
It's not just the roots of where you came from, but it's also as the phrase is used, the accountability that go along with those roots. And it's interesting. There's I don't know how much time we have on our clock, but there's a story in the Talmud in the section called Avodah Zarah, which deals with idolatry, and some of the excerpts from that whole section deal with Jewish responses to early sectarian disagreements. It's not said explicitly, but quite likely to early disagreements with Christian groups. And this quote comes up, the you alone have I singled out, but I'll call you to account for your iniquities. So if you like, there's a little passage from the Talmud that I wouldn't mind adding that speaks to this and may be of interest to some of our viewers. And you can, after I go through it, you can cut it out or edit it as you want.
No, go for it.
Okay, so Rabbi Abahu introduced Rav Safra, who was from Babylon. There were two different main areas of Jewish life at this time. There was the people who still lived in the land of Israel, and the people who lived in Babylon, which was no longer Babylon, but Persia. And they had slightly different teachings, slightly different culture. So Rav Safra comes from Babylon, and he's now living in the land of Israel. And he introduces him to the sectarians, the Minim. And he says this is a learned man, this is a wise man, a sage, which meant at the time that you would be exempt from taxes. Right? If you were a sage, you didn't have to pay the same taxes as if you were a person who was unlearned. It was kind of a pastoral allowance that was granted by the government at the time. So one day these Minim go to Rav Safra, this Babylonian guy, and they ask him, so it's written here in Amos, right? I have singled you out alone from all the families of the earth. That is why I call you to account for all your sins. So therefore they ask him, does someone who is angry take out his anger against his beloved? right? That doesn't seem to make sense. That it should seem to imply, therefore, that Israel is no longer loved by God. Because look at how bad life is for the Jews, right? And look at what's being said here. So therefore, clearly God has moved on and has left you, the Jewish people, behind. Well, Rav Safra doesn't answer. He keeps his mouth closed. He doesn't give an answer. So the sectarians brand him as not being a sage and begin to harass and abuse him. And Rabbi Abahu comes along and says, wait a minute, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? He said, well, you lied to us. You said this guy was learned, but he doesn't know how to answer us. And therefore, we are within our rights to punish him for coming with false pretenses as being a man of learning. And Rabbi Abahu says, no, you don't understand. When I said he was a sage, I meant that he is a sage in the Torah Sheba Al Peh, that he is a sage with regards to the oral law. But he is not necessarily a sage in the same way with the Torah Shebichtav, the written law. That is to say, he cannot expound and answer every single question that has to do with the text that will satisfy you. Because the sages who lived in Babylon, the sages who lived in the Persian Empire, they didn't have debates and dialogues with these kinds of sectarians. There was no one there who was constantly challenging them along these lines, so they didn't develop any tradition of how to interpret these verses and give answers to these sorts of attacks by the sectarians that the Jews who lived in the land of Israel were facing day in, day out. So Rabbi Abahu says, tell you what, I'll answer your question for you. Let me give you an answer to that verse, since I live here and have had to deal with these questions all the time, and then you can tell us. And he says, it's like a parable. It's a parable between a person who has debts that are outstanding with two different people. One of them is a stranger, and the other one is a friend. He will collect the debt from his friend little by little, and he'll collect his debt from the stranger all at once. Now, what he means by that is that, yes, it is true that the Jews, under your rule, he's sort of implying, are suffering day by day, that our lot in life is not going perfectly. But that collection of our debt, that payback for our transgressions, is happening day by day, little by little. It's not stored up in one lump sum. Whereas those of you who think you're on top, those of you who think you've got it made, well, eventually the bill's going to come due. And when it comes due, it's going to be in a lump sum. And personally, I'd rather pay my debt monthly or daily than pay it in one lump sum. So this is a kindness that God is doing for us. This is not a punishment.
I like it. Can two walk together without having met? Does a lion roar in the forest when he has no prey? Does a great beast let out a cry from its den without having made a capture? Does a bird drop to the ground in a trap with no snare there? Does a trap spring up from the ground unless it has caught something? When a ram's horn is sounded in a town, do the people not take alarm? Can misfortune come to a town if the Lord has not caused it? Indeed, my Lord God does nothing without having revealed his purpose to his servants and prophets. Before I do 8, because 8's great and I want to do that separately, we're looking at a series of it's painting a picture, isn't it, of cause and effect. That that God's hand is in everything.
But it's not just a picture of cause and effect, it's also a picture of effect and cause. So he's trying to show that you can go both directions. That if you see the cause, you will know the effect. And if you see the effect, you should be able to reason out the cause. Because all of that has been made clear, is what he's trying to say. Because God has revealed everything that we need to know of how we're supposed to be living. And therefore, when the consequences catch up to us of living in such a corrupt and abusive society as the northern kingdom of Israel was, this is not a surprise. This is not an effect that comes out of nowhere. And if you begin to see things crumbling around you, you should understand the cause is our injustice. It's not something else that's happening. It's the cause that was already spelled out to us as being the problem.
And it's kind of saying at the end there, isn't he? You should be listening to me.
Yeah, there's no guesswork involved here. It's all been spelled out. It's all very clear. It's all very simple. You don't wonder why the lion is roaring. You know why he's roaring. You don't wonder why the snap, trap snapped up. You know why it happened. You shouldn't be surprised by what I'm saying, and you shouldn't be surprised by what's going to happen.
A lion has roared, who can but fear? My Lord God has spoken, who can but prophesy? I really like that last part. I thought that was very succinct, and it's kind of I feel that he's kind of saying I have to do this. That's what it feels like to me. That's what I'm here for.
Okay. Amos begins his career as a prophet by saying, I'm not really a prophet. I'm not part of this prophetic tradition. I'm not one of the official prophets, but I have to speak. That I have been shown, I have been touched, and I need to share this with my people. And I think he's driving that home now at this section where he's sort of driving the point to his own people within his own nation, that they have to understand that what he's saying isn't because he wants to say it, and he's not saying it just because it's fun to say. He's saying it because he feels absolutely compelled. He can see the way of the world. He has understood how God's world is put together, and he sees what the consequences to his nation is going to be, and he has to talk. The lion has roared. He is afraid for his people. And the only thing he can do is try to spell out to people what is coming, what the inevitability of their actions is leading towards. And you have to speak.
It says in line 4, doesn't it? Does a lion roar in the forest when he has no prey? And I think maybe he's alluding to that in that last part, that that the lion, being God, has a prey and target, and people should take notice. So there we are. That was our Haftarah portion for this week. If you liked this video, then share it with your friends and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to thank our friend Rabbi Joshua Neely for joining us again this week.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us again this week, and for sharing the video so far, and for watching all of our shows, and for all the thumbs up. We appreciate it. Stick around to the end of the video for next week's Haftarah portion, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.